Assalamualaikum dan salam sejahtera. Sulaiman Haris. Anda sedang menonton Agenda Awani dan kami bersiaran daripada sisi dialog perniagaan mengenai ekonomi digital ASEAN 2025 yang dianjurkan oleh Forum Ekonomi Sedunia atau WEF. Berbagai perkara dibincangkan yang terkait dengan ekonomi digital dalam forum ini. Berbagai cabaran yang kita depani dalam arena geopolitik semasa dengan dasar perlindungan perdagangan, dengan kebangkitan AI dan teknologi, dengan kebangkitan nasionalisme di peringkat antarabangsa. Semua itu menjadi cabaran khasnya untuk negara-negara membangun sistem Malaysia untuk terus mengecapi kemajuan secara konsisten dan kekal berdaya saing di peringkat global. Saya ingin menelusuri perbincangan ini dan juga cabaran-cabaran ini bersama dengan tetamu kita dalam episod pada kali ini. Marun Khairus adalah pengarah urusan untuk WEF di mana beliau mengetuai Pusat Wilayah Perdagangan dan Geopolitik WEF, dan Marun menyelia penglibatan WEF dengan sektor awam dan membentuk agenda WEF mengenai perdagangan, pelaburan dan juga hal ehwal geopolitik. Dan izinkan saya untuk mengalihkan perbualan ini ke dalam bahasa Inggeris untuk berbual dengan Marun. Marun, thanks so much for joining us.
Pleasure to be with you, Luqman.
So, I see your experience and expertise, and you've done pretty much everything. But we only have about half an hour for this interview, so I have to pick and choose. But I want to start with the big picture. Globalization, which we've talked about many times before. Many argue globalization has primarily benefited advanced economies and countries. So is globalization redeemable for those who feel left behind, or is it fundamentally flawed?
First of all, Luqman, we have to acknowledge that globalization has, in its previous form, has helped people across the world. China was able to lift 600 million people out of poverty, thanks in large part to globalization. India started its growth miracle when it lifted the import rush. That doesn't mean that globalization doesn't have downsides. Of course, there were winners and losers because the proceeds, the gains from globalization were not fairly distributed within countries. And this is why not only in developing countries, but also in advanced countries, you see today discontent related to how the globalization has developed. Now we are at a new stage of globalization. If you look at the past, each new wave of globalization was underpinned by a new wave of technology. We are now at the doorstep of an AI revolution, which means we have a new wave of globalization, which also is an opportunity for us to do better this time, to have a more inclusive, more encompassing globalization, which brings people along and which leaves no one behind.
Right. We'll talk about AI in just a second. But as you said, AI is a chance for us to kind of restart or learn from past mistakes. But there are also things that have been there for a while and will continue to be there. Things like, trade policies, global trade. And I think whenever we talk about, globalization leaving people behind or leaving some countries behind, we often point to trade. You see the US is always complaining about trade imbalances, etc. So trade policies often tout inclusivity, whether within the people of one country or between countries. But in practice, small, fragile economies such as ours still struggle. What structural changes would it take for trade rules to be effective in curbing inequality?
You have countries who have been able to make the most of the current trade system. You look at countries like Singapore, Malaysia, Vietnam, Thailand. They've done well because they managed to integrate themselves in regional and global supply chains. If you are not able to do that, then the trade system probably doesn't work for you. We also have to point out that oftentimes trade is blamed for the impact of other things. For example, technology has changed the nature of jobs in the past, and this is why the map of jobs has also been impacted by that. But of course, we can always do better to make sure trade is more inclusive. One aspect is to simplify trade a lot so that SMEs and developing countries can compete on an equal footing. One way to do that is to reduce bureaucracy in trade, to make it more accessible. The World Economic Forum, including today, has been working through its Trade Tech initiative, which basically aims to digitize a lot of the trade and simplify a lot of the trade processes so that it is accessible not only to the big international companies, but that also small companies, SMEs, and companies in developing markets can and are able to benefit from trade and compete on an equal footing.
Right. I think that resonates well with the people in this country because more than 90% of the companies here in Malaysia are SMEs, so that's key. I want to zoom out, because you mentioned that whenever there are problems brought about by other things like the rise of technology, trade is often blamed. But trade is really just one component of it, if at all. But the big picture is, I guess, multilateralism. Now, I'm sure you've heard it many times before. We see what's happening in the US, we see what's happening in some countries in Europe, even in the UK with Brexit a few years back. They said that multilateralism is in decline. So do you think institutions like the WTO, the WEF, the IMF how do you still hold legitimacy and effectiveness in a fragmental world where multilateralism is said to be in decline? Or does a global system need overhauling?
First of all, there is no efficient alternative to multilateralism. The issues we face in today's world are as interconnected, interwoven as they have ever been. If you take everything from climate change, pollution doesn't start at your own border. By definition, it's an international problem. AI, the impact of what happens in one country will reverberate across the world. Migration, other issues, they are by definition crossing boundaries. And so you will always need a multilateral framework for addressing that. Now, do the international organization need reform? Of course they do. The world has changed from the days when they were formed in the late 40s. And so an update is definitely needed. The voice of developing countries need also to be better represented in these fora. There is no doubt about that. To reflect the makeup of the global GDP and the global population that we have today. That doesn't mean, though, that we throw the baby out with the bathwater. That still means dialogue and international fora are crucial. In what concerns the World Economic Forum, you notice that our mission is about public-private cooperation. At a time when you see the international state or the multilateral system in a deadlock, at a time when you see governments more and more intervening in the economy, but also when you see companies being private superpowers, especially in tech and AI, the World Economic Forum's platform for dialogue is as needed as it's ever been. And so we are committed to continuing that mission, including through dialogue like the one we are hosting here today, and our annual meeting in Davos in January.
Right. So let's talk about AI. So AI, and green technologies obviously are going to or are already reshaping the world economy. But like you said, they also have the big potential to deepen divides, like we've seen with some components of globalization. So back to your question or what you were saying earlier, how do we ensure we do it right this time? How do we ensure that the rise of these two phenomena, AI, green technologies and the like, do not repeat the same mistakes of globalization?
Luqman, an important thing to point out just when we talk about the impact, the Future of Jobs report that the Forum published in 2025 indicates that 22% of jobs will be impacted by AI by 2030. Close to 40% of skills that we have now will need to change by that time to be productive in AI. That shows you the way that you need to follow for AI to be inclusive and to benefit, to be diffused and to benefit the economy as a whole. The two bottlenecks that we could face related to AI are, one, energy and electricity. That's what the nervous system of AI is made of. And so policies like the one that have been pushed under Malaysia's chairmanship of ASEAN related to integrating the region's electricity market are crucial for success in the AI age. And second, talent. You're seeing now AI engineers being made offers at the level of the CEOs. We've seen some tech companies pay millions of dollars to some AI engineers, and that tells you how important talent is in this context. And competition for talent is a key determinant of competitiveness in this age. I want to take a minute just to illustrate something related to talent. The average Nobel Prize winner is in the top 5% income distribution of the world. That tells you that 95% of the geniuses that we have and 95% of the most intelligent people are not being discovered because they live in the wrong country, they go to the wrong school, or they live in the wrong city. And so the key question is for developing countries, how can we find, develop, and nurture the top talent that we have? And I think that's going to be the key factor, reworking our education system, reworking how we impart skills to our population is going to be a key determinant of competitiveness and success in the age of AI.
Right. Well, I don't mean to sound shallow, but I think the argument is that when you want to develop your country, whether in terms of physical infrastructure or its talents or its human capital, there are a lot of things that can and should be done, but inevitably it also involves a lot of capital, right? Because it also takes a lot of money. So we see this vicious cycle throughout history where, less endowed countries because they have populations that cannot fulfill their potential. Like you said, they are being undiscovered. But at the same time, they don't have the means to actually elevate the skills and the capacity of their populations to actually elevate the status of the country and the economy of the country. So it's like a vicious cycle. So do you think this is a simplistic way of looking at it? Is it also, are we condemning poorer nations to stay in the same cycle because they don't have enough money and they can't get themselves out of this trap?
The financing question is a key one. One aspect of it is that the private sector is a key partner in the investments needed on that front. And so, of course, if you're a fragile nation, you need help to be able to attract the necessary investments. And that doesn't mean developed countries are off the hook. Of course, developed countries, but also most countries that are doing well, share a responsibility to build partnerships. I'm not saying aid on its own is not enough, but that partnership lens, building partnerships, win-win partnerships, is the way forward to make sure that these least developed countries you mentioned are not left behind. And so shifting from a framework of aid or handouts to a framework of investment and partnership, that mindset shift, I think, can make a big difference. But at the same time, these countries are sovereign actors as well. They cannot fully rely on the rest. And so they also have a responsibility to boost the competitiveness of their economies, to simplify bureaucracy, to digitize what they can digitize, to be more attractive to private investment.
Right. I think this truly is a global phenomenon. Even developed economies, so-called developed economies, are now looking to refresh their human capital and reskill their people. And we definitely can relate here in Malaysia because the one of the priorities of the government has always been to, establish a population with the right skills, highly skilled population for us to go to the next step to be a high-income country. We got about 10 minutes left, Maru. Now, I have to ask you about the US-China, bipolar order that we're increasingly seeing now. Well, the rivalry is intensifying. Are we witnessing the inevitable and probably irreversible rise of a bifurcated global economy because of this rivalry? And if so, what's the cost for middle powers like Malaysia?
First of all, that's a very important question. The first thing to point out is that the IMF has established an estimate for what a bifurcated world will look like. And the cost on the world economy would be $7 trillion, 7% loss in global GDP. A bifurcated technology space would even be higher, 12% of global GDP. And so, of course, the most affected countries are those that are caught in the middle, like Malaysia, for example, that has good trade relations with both sides.
Open economy.
An open economy with good supply chains, well integrated in the world market, good commercial relations with the US, but also a good commercial relation with China. It will have an impact, for sure. But at the same time, there is reason for optimism. I feel that the previous few months has shown both countries how interdependent they are. With a big, there's $1 billion US dollars a day of trade that takes place between those two countries. So it's not as easy as that to completely decouple. That still means they will have to they compete on some issues, but you can find areas where collaboration and coordination is still possible, which should minimize the risk to the rest of the world. Now, what countries like Malaysia can do, and I think they've done very effectively, is to keep the balance between the two, but also a good solution is to look within your own region. If global trade is stagnating, it's a good incentive to further deepen regional trade. And trade within ASEAN, a quarter of ASEAN trade happens within the bloc. That compares to 2/3 in the EU. So there is a big upside to further deepening at the regional level, and especially on the digital economy front.
Right. I started off with a big picture kind of question. I want to end with one as well. How do you reconcile, the friction or the tension or whatever word that you think is fair between the WEF's mission of global cooperation and also the reality that many governments are now, unfortunately, doubling down on nationalism?
We are shifting to a world that is now more sovereignty first, let's say, and where sovereignty is playing a bigger role. And there has always been phases in history where sovereignty has risen on the agenda and then decreased, but that doesn't clash necessarily with global collaboration. You can still collaborate with others while taking your own interest into consideration. That's what real collaboration, durable collaboration, has to be anchored in the national interest. And in this context, I would argue the forum is needed even more so when multilateral fora are going a bit slower and when direct dialogue is happening less frequently, to bridge those gaps and build that dialogue. And I give you just one example that we've been doing over the past year. We have been convening a group of CEOs, academics, business leaders, experts, informal group from both China and the US to keep the channels open between these groups as even when formal channels are not open. And now we are in a more optimistic phase. We saw yesterday, for example, an agreement on TikTok in the US. So there are indications that there could be a more positive way forward for the G2, but also for the global economy.
Right. Do you think what we are seeing is cyclical? Because if you look at probably the vast majority of modern human history, you see this, you see sovereignty first, you see nationalism, you see world war, etc. And we come to a point where we were kind of enlightened. Some call it the Enlightenment age, maybe starting 80s, 90s, we embraced globalization, and then that went well for 20 or 30 years, and then now we're back here where a lot of countries are re-questioning globalization. Do you think this is just an aberration? Because the average 20-year-old now in Malaysia, and I'm sure the world over, who's just finished studying, who's just entering the job market, are now concerned and said, I'm looking at the world and it's like this. It's becoming bifurcated, it's becoming divergent, it's getting harder to get a job, it's getting harder to get a good pay. Is it going to be okay for me in 20 or 30 years? So for people like that, for the future generation, what do you say to them?
I would say it's a different world. The 80s and 90s were more, especially the 90s, were a unipolar world where you had one big power that was able to, in a way, set the agenda on the global stage, and the others followed. This world is more multipolar, or we are moving in that direction, and you don't have a single power. You still have the US as the biggest economy, but there are now many economies, also many regions, many middle powers that are vying and asserting their influence. And so what I would say is that is a different world from the one where we grew up. It's not necessarily worst, and you can still find a way to, you know, as you were saying about graduates, that doesn't necessarily decrease your opportunities, because there is a premium now on being able to navigate different systems, different cultures, different, let me say, regions, and Malaysia is perfectly set up for this. And so the question then becomes, how do you turn that situation into an advantage for you and into an advantage for your country and your region?
Right. So what's next for the WEF?
What's next? We are very much looking forward to our annual meeting in Davos. We are looking forward to strong participation from Malaysia, but also ASEAN in January. And it will be an important milestone at the beginning of next year for continuing to facilitate that dialogue between countries, but also between the public sector and the private sector, because for any of the big global challenges we are faced with, the private sector is a key partner and a key part of the solution.
Right. Maroon, thank you very much.
Thank you, Luqman.
At least now I can tell my kids to not be afraid of AI and robots to take their jobs, if policies are in place to ensure that those technologies actually augment and improve our quality of life.
And if they are well equipped for that, yes, of course.
I think back to your message, it all starts with education, I guess, first and foremost, whatever country you're in, right? Thank you so much, Maroon Khairuz, and I hope, I wish you the best of luck in what the WEF does. Of course, there will be challenges, but the world is a better place with WEF and people like you in it. Terima kasih Pengarah Urusan Forum Ekonomi Sedunia WEF, Pusat Wilayah dan Perdagangan dan Geopolitik untuk WEF, dan serta itu kami dari Sarawak Awani dan juga Agenda Awani akan terus menelusuri semua isu dan juga perbincangan ini berkenaan dengan cabaran-cabaran yang membelenggu perkembangan ataupun pertumbuhan ekonomi negara, yang juga pada masa yang sama menjadi peluang untuk bertumbuh dan juga menjadi ekonomi maju, berdaya tahan dan juga berpendapatan tinggi. Terima kasih kepada semua, dan sekian saja siaran Agenda Awani dari sisi Dialog Perniagaan mengenai Ekonomi Digital ASEAN 2025, anjuran Forum Ekonomi Sedunia atau WEF. Jumpa lagi dalam episod seterusnya. Assalamualaikum dan salam hormat.